Hi, welcome to my lecture on XML documents for publishing. This is a continuation of a series of lectures that I'm doing for my XML for Libraries course at UWM. And anybody else who finds a way here on YouTube is welcome to join in as well. So here we are, we're on slide 72. Our title says Documents for Publishing. We've already gone through XML documents that are appropriate for data interchange. So what we're really going to focus on now is how would XML documents for publishing be different than the documents that we designed and authored for data interchange. So the main thing that we have here is an example document, and it's a procedure, some kind of a work procedure document from a procedure manual, and it's information on how to lubricate a piece of equipment, a CNC router. And we'll just kind of work our way through. So we begin with the XML declaration. That's pretty clear. And then within that, we have a root element or document element, depending upon your preference about what you like to call them. And it's called procedure. So all of the content for the procedure is in the element called procedure. And we begin with a couple of metadata-oriented kind of elements. I think that'd probably be the best way to describe them. Title, author, department, and revision date. And then, like a typical article, we have an abstract. So we have a section here called abstract, and it just has a lot of freestanding text in it right now. And you have to remember that as in an HTML document, freestanding text in an XML document may appear to be broken up into paragraphs and lines. And that's just because of the way the whitespace has been used within the document. But when we go to process an XML document like this, in particular when we go to transform it with XSLT, this is a text that's all going to run together. Okay, and whitespace, carriage returns, blank spaces, all those things, they'll all be normalized to a single space. Okay, so this looks prettier now than it would look like when we go to publish it. And then moving on to slide 74, we're getting to the end here, and so we have the end tag for abstract. And then we have an element called details. And as you can see, we don't have all the content in there yet. We just the sentence that says the detailed procedure will go right here. And then we have the end tag for details and the end tag for procedure, and we're done with the document. So let's go through the observations that we have about the document. The first is that narrative text documents are easily modeled with XML. So this is a typical narrative kind of document, and it was pretty easy to put together some XML that held the content in tags that did a pretty good job of representing both the structure and the meaning of the document. So typically when we model this kind of document, the root element represents the whole narrative document. Metadata elements typically appear first as the children of the root. So it's pretty typical to have metadata as kind of sprinkled around the top of the document. And in this particular design, they're not collected together in an element that contain them called metadata, but they might have been. Okay, so we're not going to do things the same way in every design, so you can see sort of what the range of possible designs are. Then, after we have the metadata for the document, well, the normal document content follows that. And divisions of the content are reflected by the element hierarchy. So for instance, we have an abstract element and we have a details element, and those are going to be major structural parts of the document. Okay, now the typical thing that we're going to do here, we're going to evolve the example so you can see additional features that we're going to want to add to the document to make it more favorable for publishing. Okay, so as you see here on slide 76, we come into the document, we have the root element, the procedure element, and then we have a couple of metadata related elements, title, author, department, revision date. And then we get into abstract again. But one of the things you see is we have further markup surrounding the text that's inside of abstract. And I'll comment on that a little bit more in a minute. Okay, so you can see that text has been broken up and contained in paragraph elements. And you can also see, if you looked at, we put some special characters into the text, and they're going to help us in an important way. And then on slide number 77, we can see that as we come to the end of the abstract, we have to close the last of the paragraph elements. So we have an end paragraph tag, we have an end abstract tag. Then we have the details element that hasn't changed at all. And we have the end procedure tag to end the document. And as usual, we have a couple of comments on the features of this version of the document. And the first point that I'd like to make is that Whitespace, spaces and carriage returns, Whitespace is usually not significant in an XML document. There are some things that you can add to an XML document to say, I want you to pay attention to the whitespace. So we really want to look at how this text is formatted in the input file. But typically that's not part of our use case, and so we typically expect whitespace to not be significant. So your markup application, your tag set that you are designing as the analyst on this job, it needs to include elements like paragraph to show logical divisions. You will notice that I called this paragraph when I designed the element rather than just simply P, which is of course the element we use for paragraphs in HTML. And I did that to make a point, and that is we're inventing this tag set. So this may have the same meaning, okay, the same structural significance as the P tag does in XHTML, but because we're coming up with our own tag set, we could have decided to do the same thing. We could have said, well, P will be a paragraph in our tag set too, but I didn't do that. I just wanted to show you that we could come up with our own element name for the element that's going to represent a paragraph division. The characters, there are just a few characters that we could type at the keyboard that are not allowed typed in the clear, unescaped, as we'll say in a minute, in the text of an XML document, and they are the less than sign and the ampersand. Well, how do we get that into the text? Well, we use a multi-character sequence, and these are called general entity references. So to insert a less than sign, we use ampersand LT semicolon, and to insert an ampersand, a proper ampersand into the text to say something like Smith and Jones Incorporated, well, then we use ampersand AMP semicolon. All right. So these character sequences are used by authors in lieu of using the less than and the ampersand directly because of the rules of XML. And again, this approach, these are called general entity references. Now, it turns out that the ones that we have to use are the ones for the less than and the ampersand. There are others that are here for our convenience. So if, for instance, if we're going to code a less than with a general entity reference, and then maybe we'd like to do the same thing for a greater than, although we could simply type the character for the greater than and it'd be fine. Well, then there is a general entity reference for greater than, ampersand GT semicolon. And there's one for apostrophe, which is typically thought of as a single quote. It's ampersand APOS semicolon. And one for a double quote, it's ampersand QUOT semicolon. And again, these three are really for our convenience. We could actually use the key on the keyboard if we wanted, whereas the less than and the ampersand will not work if we simply type them without using the general entity reference that we use to represent them. When we use a general entity reference to represent a less than or an ampersand, it's typically said that we have escaped the less than, or we have escaped the ampersand. So because of that, a typical way to express the rule about what you can and what you can and can't type in the text of an XML document is we'll say you can't type an unescaped less than or an unescaped ampersand in the XML document, which is to say we need to use the general entity references instead. Now, one of the nice things about XML documents here on slide number 79 is that they use the Unicode character representation scheme, and a good thing for that is it allows us to use many more characters than appear on a typical keyboard. Okay, so what kind of characters might want to use? Well, you might want to use characters from another natural language like Spanish or French or Russian or Korean, in which case there are ways to refer to characters using a series of characters that look like general entity references, but they're a little different. They're formed with an ampersand and then a pound sign and then a code point number. And so, for instance, if we want to insert the registered trademark symbol in a document, we would use the character sequence ampersand pound sign 174 semicolon. Okay, and we do that in our sample document here simply because we want to show what it's like to put a character in that's not on our keyboard with this approach, which is called character referencing. Okay, so if we just back up, I'm going to back up to the document that I showed you before, you will notice that we do have a couple of places where we have used some of these character things. So here on slide number 76, if you look at the department element, we have, it's called research and development with an ampersand. And how do we get that ampersand into the document? Well, we can't just simply type an unescaped ampersand. We have to use the general entity reference, and that's the reason why you see the ampersand AMP semicolon there. If you go down a couple lines from there, you'll see the beginning of the first of the paragraphs, and we are referring to a Larkin 2424 CNC router, and this is an actual machine that I once owned. And Larkin actually has a registered trademark, and so the registered trademark symbol appropriately appears after Larkin. And so because we're not able to type that on my keyboard, at least, we get that character in by using the sequence ampersand pound sign 174 semicolon. Now what's going to happen is that when we go to process the document and transform it with XSLT, we're just going to see the registered trademark symbol there. And likewise, up under the department element, we're just going to see the ampersand there. Okay, that's enough of that. So why don't we catch up with the example. We've moved on to the next iteration in example 3.10 on slide 80, and that is using mixed content. Now this is an approach that we rarely use in data interchange. Some would say we never do it, but never is a very strong word, right? But let's just see what we're doing. In the first of the paragraphs, okay, right after the start tag, we've taken the phrase Larkin 2424 CNC router, and we've decided that we want to identify that range of text as a piece of equipment. And so we have surrounded it with an equipment element. So you see the start tag right before the word Larkin, and you see the end tag right after the word router. Okay? And then let's just go a little bit farther down towards the bottom of the slide. We have the phrase Teflon spray, and we've decided that for some reason in our publishing, it's important to be able to identify the supplies that we would use in a procedure. So we've taken the phrase Teflon spray and we have enclosed it in a supply element. Well, this approach of taking some parts of running text and enclosing them in elements that modify the running text and give extra meaning to the parts that they enclose. This approach is called mixed content. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a minute. So I'm looking here on slide 81. It doesn't look like we have any more mixed content. So, comments about this. Well, enclosing selected words and phrases within running text, this is an approach called mixed content. The enclosing elements act as modifiers, and they impart meaning and/or context to the text that is enclosed. Enclosing the text in these elements can trigger special formatting when the document is transformed into a web page using XHTML or a high-quality print document using XSLFO. Okay, now we're going to add some more. We're going to do further updating of the document to add some content into the details. Okay, so we're not showing the whole document again. We're just going to show the part here. This is an example 3.11 on slide number 83. We're just going to show you the details of the details. So, of course, the parent element is details. And then let's see what occurs within that. Well, there's a frequency. So that's how often we would do the procedure. We can see it's every 9 to 18 months. Duration, 1 hour. So this is a procedure that's going to take 1 hour. And then we have a bunch of steps that are enclosed in an element named steps. And what's enclosed in steps? Well, it looks like a series of elements with the name step. So we've got one step with the name determine need for lubrication. That's the first one. Then the second one has the name procure supplies. And then the third one has the name clean machine first. And one of the kind of interesting aspects of the design here is that we decided to carry the name as an attribute value rather than as a sub-element. We could have done it either way, okay? Now, it's usually good to review what we gave up by deciding to do this as an attribute. Okay, what we got by doing this as an attribute is a really nice format. So you can just say step name equals determine need for lubrication. Okay, that's good. What did we give up? Well, if we had had name as the first sub-element under step, we could have had more than one. So if we can have more than one name, then we probably don't want to design it as being carried on an attribute. We probably want to carry it on as a sub-element. But we only have one name, so that's fine. And the other thing is that what if we wanted to mark up the text inside of the name further? Put sub-elements in there, have it have mixed content, further mixed content. Well, we couldn't do that either. Okay, but so as long as you're only going to have one name and you don't need to mark up the text that's inside the name, well, it becomes very handy to just represent it as a name attribute rather than as a name sub-element. So we've got a series of steps. Let's see, we've got determine need for lubrication, procure supplies, clean machine first. On the next slide, apply lubricant. And then we see that there are, we have the end tag for steps and the end tag for details. Well, let's just go look at the more formal comments here on the next slide, slide number 85. I think I mentioned in a previous lecture that when we have a repeating element group, like we have a lot of step elements that repeat in a group, we can decide to enclose that group in a parent element that contains them. And that's what we've done here. We've decided that there is going to be a parent called steps that is going to have one or more children called step. Okay. Did we have to? No, we didn't have to. I find it to be helpful. Okay. And so I recommend it. Also, representing the name of each step as an attribute rather than as a sub-element makes the document read easily. So that's the payback. When you decide to carry something as an attribute, it looks good. It's easier to read, typically. Now, it turns out that we don't have to record the number of each step in the document. And this becomes interesting because when we print a procedure, we would like to see 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, do we have to put that in the input in order to get it in the output? And the fact is that we don't. Element numbering can be generated using the XSLT transformation language. So it's just as easy to not say what the number of the step is. We will count them when we do the transformation. And so when you look at the web page, or when you look at the high quality print document, you're going to see the numbers without having to maintain them in the proper order as you maintain the procedure. Logical division elements like a paragraph can be used in several different contexts. So you will remember that we used the paragraph in order to indicate the structure of the text that was inside the abstract. Well, it turns out that if we want to structure the text inside of a step, and it has more or less the same meaning, well then we can use that element again, and this is a typical thing to do. Modifying elements like supply can be used in several different contexts. So if we go back and look at this example, we'll find out that we, let's see if we can find supply in here somewhere. Yes, so if we look at the second step here on slide 83, procure supplies, it says use only dry, and then in supply Teflon spray. So in the same sense that we were able to reuse the paragraph element in step in the same kind of way that was used in abstract, well, we can do the same thing for mixed content elements like supply. And you'll probably see that I've used a lot of extra white space within the document. blank lines to separate different parts of the document. And because whitespace is usually not significant in an XML document, you have to add additional code to make it significant, then it's something that we can use liberally. And it's also true that even though when you look at the document, when we display it, it seems to have a lot of white space. And you go, wow, that's a lot of spaces. When you put in a blank line only takes up a couple of characters in the file. Okay, so yes, to your eyes, it's an entire blank line, but to the software and the storage, it's well, more than one character, but I can't imagine it's more than 5. It's probably something like 3. Okay, so blank lines are cheap, and we use them liberally in order to make our code more readable to humans. Right, so this is a publishing-oriented XML document that we've designed. I designed it, and I kind of told you the principles there. And then we've authored, right? And of course, as part of the course, we're going to ask you to do a similar exercise kind of on your own. And here I'm just going to say bye until next time. Bye-bye.